Hi. Official recaps here.
In San Francisco in 1981, Chris is trying to survive as a salesman of portable bone density scanners. Every morning he drops his son Junior at the daycare and visits as many hospitals in the city as possible to sell the scanners. Sadly, because they are pricey and superfluous, they are difficult to sell. He frequently runs into a crazy hobo who refers to the scanner as a time machine when he rides the bus. Chris asks his wife Linda to pick up their son when he needs to try to close a deal for a longer period of time. She frequently works double shifts to support the family, so this always irritates her. One evening at dinner, Chris discovers a Rubik's Cube, the newest toy, a gift from one of Linda's friends. When she questions Chris about paying the taxes, he responds that he will file an extension, which aggravates his wife even more. Chris plays with the cube that evening and solves it very quickly. When Chris goes for his daily walk the following morning, he sees a man getting out of a very expensive sports car. When Chris asks what he does for a living, the man tells him that he trades stocks. Chris believes that a college degree is a prerequisite for that kind of work, but the man says a person only needs to be numerate and people-oriented. Chris believes he wants that life for himself after observing how content the firm's employees are. The next morning, Chris tells Linda that he would be late in the evening because he will stop at an office to apply as a stockbroker. Linda calls his unrealistic dream ridiculous and teases him for it. Chris then tells Linda not to speak to him in that way, which leads to an argument that ends when Linda reminds him they have 2 months' worth of rent to pay. Chris visits a brokerage firm to apply for a job at some point after that. Every 6 months, this company hires 20 people, but only one is hired. He gives the scanner to a hippie girl singing on the street, giving her some cash to watch out for it, because he wants to look respectable. Chris enters the building, hears about the position, and receives the application. Suddenly, though, he looks out the window and sees the girl scurrying off with the scanner. With the application in hand, Chris heads out and follows her through the station and city, but the girl manages to get away by boarding a train. The following day, Chris tells Linda that he will sell the scanner to make it disappear from their view, but not before stopping by the office to drop off the completed application. In an attempt to make a good impression and tell him a little about himself, he makes sure to personally deliver it to Jay, the manager of the resource department. However, Jay is pressed for time and says he will call back. Chris then witnesses the hippie girl and her companion using the scanner as they pass by. When it becomes apparent that he has spent all of his life savings on those scanners, he becomes enraged and starts chasing them. He was unaware that medical professionals in hospitals would view it as an unnecessary luxury, even though it is meant to be a revolutionary machine. Chris compares the loss of a scanner to the loss of a month's worth of groceries. Chris eventually corners the couple in the bus after a lot of running and retrieves the scanner. This implies that he will actually have 2 scanners when he gets home, rather than having sold the one he had. Although Linda is quite disappointed by this, she chooses to remain silent because it is Junior's birthday. Linda tells Chris how upset she is with his lack of accountability while Junior is preoccupied. The couple has given up some cash so they can buy him a basketball and keep him happy. When Chris visits Jay a month later, he wants to know what happened to his application, but Jay is rushing. In an attempt to impress him once more, Chris pretends to be heading in the same direction so they can take a taxi together. Jay, on the other hand, is committed to cracking his own Rubik's Cube and keeps failing. When the cab gets to Jay's location, a frustrated Chris takes the cube from him and solves it. Even though Jay is very impressed, he still gets out of the taxi, so Chris has to pay now. Chris, who evidently lacks money, leaves the vehicle at a signal and flees, setting off a chase between the taxi driver and himself. Chris, in a state of desperation, dashes into the train station and boards the train. However, the train door painfully shuts on his hand, forcing him to abandon his scanner inside the station. Chris' entire schedule has been thrown off by this, and when he apologizes to Linda, she becomes furious because she had to miss work to pick up Junior and they needed the money. She declares that this is the last straw and that she is taking Junior with her when she leaves. Chris is horrified to learn of this and rushes back to his home, but it's too late. Linda has already departed with their son and everything she owned. Jay calls Chris at that precise moment and instructs him to write down his secretary's number so that he can call the following day to set up an interview. Chris tries to memorize the number when he can't find a single pen. Then, he dashes to a nearby store to borrow some paper and write the number down. Chris approaches Linda at the daycare the following morning to discuss what transpired. They decide to alternate when Linda explains that she isn't happy anymore and that Chris will let her go, but he won't let her take the child. The financial situation deteriorates further in Linda's absence from work. The landlord eventually grows weary of Chris not paying his rent and comes to ask him to leave in the morning because painters are scheduled to arrive. The landlord grants Chris an additional week because he promises to pay on time and complete the painting himself. Chris is painting the walls a few days later when 2 police officers show up at his house. They take him to the station, where Chris has to pay for all of his parking tickets. He must unfortunately spend the night in jail after the policeman informs him that they will check it at 9:30 in the morning. Chris tries to clarify that he has an interview the following morning, but his explanation is ignored. Chris asks Linda to pick up Junior with just one call. The next morning, Chris is freed, but he's almost running late, so he runs to the interview in his shabby clothes. At the firm, the interview panel is disappointed by what they see. Thus Chris explains the situation and Jay confirms all the other times he saw him, Chris had been in a proper suit. Chris is funny, witty, and smart, so he manages to make a very good impression. After the interview is over, Jay comes to congratulate him, but Chris says he will have to think about it since he's learned that it's an internship with no salary and his circumstances have changed. Jay urges him to continue and promises he will fill his spot, so Jay promises to call him in the evening. Later in the evening, Linda brings Junior and drops big news. She is heading to New York because her sister's boyfriend is starting a restaurant and she might have a job there. Chris declares that he is keeping Junior because he is aware that Linda is unable to care for him. Motivated by her freedom to pursue her interests, Chris also informs her about the internship, which exacerbates her angst and prompts her to depart. Chris calls Jay after she leaves and says he can take the job. The following day, with a friend's assistance, Chris and his son relocate to a nearby motel. Chris takes his son to play basketball because it's a Saturday, and Junior declares he wants to be a professional player. Chris comforts Junior after he realizes that most people don't succeed by telling him that nobody, not even himself, should ever tell him he can't accomplish something. They eventually make a sale and receive some money that will keep them afloat for a few more days when they go to the hospital later to offer the scanner. Chris starts his internship the next morning and gets to learn about the trade. Chris never lets anyone know that he's poor. Instead, he works extremely hard to demonstrate his superiority for the job. Chris runs into his boss, Mr. Fromm, on the street during lunch and strikes up a conversation, hoping to improve his chances by licking some boots. Still believing it to be a time machine, he stops himself when he realizes that the crazy guy is in possession of the scanner. Chris follows him right away, following him through the traffic and down the street before getting struck by a car. Playing it cool, Chris returns to the office after losing sight of the guy and misplacing his shoe. Chris continues to call clients and do favors for office manager Frackish over the course of the next few days, but to no avail. Even worse, Chris has to finish the same work as the others in less time because he has to leave early to pick up Junior. Chris never uses the restroom, never drinks water, and never hangs up the phone as a result of this. Chris makes the bold decision one day to expedite the process by completing the list out of order. He takes a chance and calls a high-ranking pension fund manager named Mr. Ribbon, who schedules an appointment for him to come to his office in 20 minutes. When Chris tries to speed out of the building, Frackish stops him and requests that he park his car elsewhere. Chris attempts to park as quickly as he can because he has no other option, but Ribbon has already left by the time he gets to the meeting. Chris visits Ribbon's home the next morning while feigning to be a random visitor. He apologizes once more and thanks Ribbon for the chance, then makes it seem like he's taking Junior to the football game. Ribbon invites Chris and Junior to accompany him to his private box after telling him he's going with his child as well. Chris tries to sell Ribbon during the game, but Ribbon isn't interested in Chris despite Ribbon's admission that he likes him. Chris, on the other hand, receives Ribbon's wealthy friends' cards, and they are more interested. Chris struggles for weeks to make ends meet while juggling the sales of the scanners with his internship. But eventually, Chris finds himself bankrupt when the IRS takes money from his account to cover his overdue taxes. In a desperate attempt, Chris approaches a longtime friend for the money he loaned him, but the friend claims that by helping him move, he already paid the friend. Chris becomes enraged, but his friend simply shuts the door behind him. After a while, Chris and his son visit the park, where Chris runs into the crazy guy with the scanner once more. Chris immediately chases after him and gets his now damaged machine back. Chris attempts to sell it to the doctor after cleaning it, but sadly the machine isn't functional. Upon their return to the motel, Chris and Junior discover that their belongings are outside and that the lock has been altered due to non-payment. They find themselves without a place to live after Chris attempts in vain to pick the lock and open the window. Junior points out that the scanner isn't a time machine as the crazy guy claimed when Chris brings him to the train station because his friend still won't open his door. Chris confirms this to him, and in an attempt to lift his spirits, they pretend to go back in time and see the dinosaurs. Chris then declares that since good cavemen require a cave, they sneak into the restroom of the station and shut the door. There, they spend the night on a toilet paper blanket, and Chris lets himself cry while Junior sleeps. When Chris and Junior visit a homeless shelter the following day, they are turned away because it is exclusively for women and children, but they learn about another one. Due to the lengthy line and limited number of spots, they dash there as quickly as they can, arriving at the entrance just as there are 4 spots remaining. When security discovers that the hobo has cheated, Chris wins the last room after fighting off the hobo's attempt to take the spot. Chris makes use of the little light inside the shelter to work on the scanner and prepare for the internship exam. He always carries a few bags with him to work and makes up an excuse to his coworkers for why he is carrying around bags. Thanks to the cards he gathered, Chris is able to bring in some clients to the firm over the course of the next few days. Even though he is quite anxious on test day, he completes the test rather quickly. On his way out, Chris bumps into Fromm, who just got out of a taxi. Since he's in a hurry, he asks Chris to lend him $5 to pay for the cab. Chris can't afford to waste that, but still does it not to look bad. This delay doesn't allow Chris to get to the shelter in time, so he and Junior end up sleeping on a train. The next day, Chris donates blood for money and uses it to buy a spare part for the scanner. Today they do get to the shelter in time, and Chris finally fixes his machine. In bed, Junior wonders if his mother left because of him, and Chris makes sure to comfort him and convince him it wasn't like that. After successfully selling the scanner the following day, Chris treats Junior to a night at a hotel to help him feel better. They spent the weekend together at the beach, connecting and unwinding. Chris runs into Jay in the restroom on his last day as an intern, and Jay tells him he did a great job and congratulates him on bringing in a lot of clients. Later, Chris gets a call from Fromm telling him that he has been given the permanent job that he has been dreaming of. Fromm gives Chris the $5 back to complete the deal, and he will begin work tomorrow. Chris sobs and says, "This is the part of my life called happiness," as he exits the building. Chris then heads to pick up his son, eager to begin their new life together, and gives him a strong hug. The real Chris eventually started his own multi-million-dollar brokerage business and made millions from the sale of his minority interest in it. He's also written a very successful book detailing his whole experience.
If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.